Mayor Andrew, and just doing a quick.
I was just going to do quick introductions while we're waiting for Michael here. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure. That sounds great. So my name is Heather McNell. I'm the General Manager of Regional Planning and Housing Services at Metro Vancouver. And one of the teams that I lead is responsible for coordinating the development of the regional growth strategy. And so we're really excited to be here about that tonight. And James?
Fabulous.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And thanks for your invitation. Mayor and Council, my name is James Stiver, and I'm the Division Manager of Growth Management and Transportation, one of Heather's teams that is responsible for carrying this project through the process. So I'm also very pleased to be here and happy to talk about this every chance I get.
I'll bet you are. It's very exciting. Okay, on our side, myself, Mayor Gary Ander, welcome our people from Metro. So nice to have you here. And next we have Sheila McCutcheon in there. She's our CFO. And I'm just going to go down the list here. Sue Ellen Fast, Councillor Sue Ellen Fast. Our CFO is Liam Edwards, CAO, I'm sorry, Liam Edwards. And as you know, and David Hawking, Councillor David Hawking, Councillor Maureen Nicholson, Councillor Allison Morris, and Sophie Itzinga is doing the management today. So that's about it. And we got Heather in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is the agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting of Monday, October 25th, 2021. And I will open the meeting, and Michael will just see him when he shows up, I guess, but we'll get through some of the early stuff here first. And the approval of the agenda, does anybody have an issue with it? It's a one-shot deal here. I will approve the agenda by consensus, and we will move on to new business. And did we hear anything from Michael before we get started here?
Gary, let's just go ahead without him.
I texted and I haven't heard back.
Could be
Okay.
anywhere given the weather.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So under new business and 2.1 is a presentation of the draft Metro 2050 regional growth strategy. And it's going to be James Stiver, Division Manager, Regional Planning and Housing Services, and Heather. A little bit of a change here. Heather McNeil, that's great. Glad to have you guys here. And I'm going to just pass it right over to you. Questions? Do you want to wait till the end?
That would be great. I think there'll be lots of time for discussion, Mayor Andrew, if that's okay. Do it that way. Thank you.
Okay, that'd be
Great.
fabulous. And just a little heads up, we do have a 7 o'clock council meeting. So
Great.
we might want to quit about 2 or 3 minutes before that.
Sounds good.
Super. And then I pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good evening. And before we get going, I'd love to just start in a good way by respectfully acknowledging that Metro Vancouver's region's residents live, work, and learn on the shared territories of many Indigenous peoples, including our local 10 First Nations. So that's Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Matsqui, Musqueam, Kakite, Semiahmoo, Squamish, Tsawwassen, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so we're very happy to be here this evening to present the draft of Metro 2050. And it hasn't been that long since our last visit, but we're now in the midst of meeting with all member councils and affected boards to introduce the content of and receive some feedback on Metro 2050. We're very fortunate, as you know, to live in this region, a region of rich abundance, and we've really benefited from the thoughtful and sometimes difficult choices made by past local government leaders. And they've made some wonderful wise long-range planning decisions like protecting our critical conservation areas, our agricultural land, and investing in public transit when cities across North America were building highways. And their foresight and their regional plans really has helped to set us up for success in this process. And part of the reason that I'm here tonight is really just to emphasize to you how critical this 80-page document is to planning across the region. And so how we plan for projected growth and land use in the region has a pretty big impact, whether for better or for worse, on our other responsibilities as local governments, including for the regional utilities that Metro Vancouver provides. And as you know, we're experiencing it today. The challenges facing our region are many. We have a limited land base, we have high housing costs, we have ongoing population growth to manage, and we know we have to do a lot better in terms of helping all people in our region to thrive regardless of their age and income or background. And climate change is undoubtedly the biggest challenge of our time. I think that the past 2 years have really highlighted the importance of planning for a resilient region. COVID really has taught us the critical value of protecting and expanding our parkland, both for climate resilience, but also to meet the growing popularity of being outdoors in nature. And our experience this past summer with extreme heat and drought and rampant wildfires really demonstrate that we cannot delay action on climate change and resilience. So you'll see in this draft plan that there are strategies that tackle these very, very challenging issues. And as we look out 30 years into the future, I hope you share our optimism that if we all continue to work together, we can help and shape and create a sustainable future for the benefit of our kids and our grandchildren. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to James to walk through the content of the draft tonight.
Great, thanks so much, Heather. Is it okay if I share our presentation now? Sophie? Yep.
Yes, yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
All right, let me just maximize it. There, that looks better. Okay, so thank you, Heather, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here tonight. I'd like to also express my gratitude. So the objective of today's presentation, there we go, is to kind of walk through very quickly the history of growth strategies in our region, and to talk about the update that we have been undertaking over the past 2 years, and to specifically highlight a few elements of Metro 2050 to start some questions and discussion at the end, and then we'll summarize by finalizing a discussion on where we're at in the process and what's next. So as Heather alluded to, there's a long history of regional planning in our region that dates back formally to the 1960s. The growth strategy is a long-range policy plan along this same pattern. It is set out in the Local Government Act. There are requirements around what must be considered as part of a growth strategy if a region is to enter into one. So the purpose of what we are doing today with the growth strategy is to take the learnings and the patterns that have established our high quality of life in this region and carry them forward into the future. This is about managing growth. It's not about encouraging new growth. It's to address what is anticipated to come into this region. And from a legal sense, it has to be accepted by all members of all local governments of the region, including TransLink and adjacent regional districts before it can be adopted. So in terms of what we have entered into, it was meant to be an update. It wasn't meant to be a rewrite of the regional growth strategy. There are many successes with Metro 2040 that we wanted to reinforce and carry forward. There was a strategic opportunity to align with TransLink's new regional transportation strategy that's also being updated at the moment, called Transport 2050. And as you can anticipate, over the last 10 years, there's been many learnings that have come through implementation of Metro 2040. The world has changed in terms of the urgency for certain priorities and new challenges facing this region. And Heather touched on some of those earlier that we needed to spend more time considering than we have in the past. So throughout the process of updating this plan, it started formally in early 2019, and it has been marked with extensive engagement with municipalities, First Nations, regional agencies such as TransLink, other stakeholders, all local governments, and the province. The background of the update was driven primarily by what we had called policy reviews, which were themed by topic area to look at the challenges and opportunities facing the different topic areas of the plan. There were extensive public dialogue events that we launched pre-COVID and had to pivot quite profoundly when we were impacted by the pandemic to primarily go online. But that had also presented some opportunities for us to reach a broader audience virtually than we likely would have if we stuck to in person. And then, of course, extensive engagement with the Regional Planning Committee and Metro Vancouver Board. So fast forward to early this year when content was starting to be drafted based on all that input. Again, extensive engagement with municipalities, regional stakeholders, an intergovernmental advisory committee that was established, and that which included representatives from Bowen Island and also regional planning committee and the board, and I'll touch on the comment period in a moment, but that's where we're at right now. So in terms of the draft of Metro 2050, again, it builds on the content of Metro 2040. It's not meant to be a rewrite. It reflects 2 years of extensive engagement. And these changes that are being proposed in the new plan respond to what we heard in terms of priorities and opportunities facing the region today. Where we're at in the process, the Metro Vancouver board distributed the full draft of Metro 2050 out to commence a formal comment period at its meeting at the end of July. And the plan right now contains actions for Metro Vancouver as an organization, but also the member jurisdictions in TransLink. So the growth strategy is driven by a need to manage and address growth projections that are coming to this region over the next 30 years. And fundamental to the drafting of this plan has been an update to the population, dwelling unit, and job projections that were used to build Metro 2040. So steady growth in this region is projected to continue, approximately 35,000 new people a year, which translates into almost 1 million new people in this region over the next 30 years. So these projections were based on trends and immigration to this region that have been established over time. There is a built-in plus or minus 15% buffer, and these projections have been ground truth with all our member jurisdictions. So in terms of just a quick note about COVID, we've had a lot of questions about how COVID has affected these growth projections, but given that they're 30-year projections and there is already a built-in buffer, as you get further out, you can imagine that projections get fuzzier. The assumptions around the impact of COVID are that it will be a short-term acute shock, but within the assumed buffer. And we continue to monitor the projections over time, and we'll only know truly what the impact and how long the impact of COVID has lasted until at the point when we've gotten through it and look back. So fast forward to Metro 2050. It is a plan built on 5 pillars. These are similar to the pillars of Metro 2040. The only difference is goal 4, which had been entitled Complete Communities. It's been entirely rewritten to be focused on housing, given the urgency around affordable housing and homelessness in this region. So to highlight quickly what is proposed with the new plan, through our work, we've identified that there's a need for greater clarity on the urban centers and frequent transit development areas of the region, essentially our transit-oriented areas. A stronger alignment between the locations for growth and transit, and a new tool called the Major Transit Growth Corridors to provide a greater focus on the connecting pieces between the centers in this region and make better use of the major transit network. That is a tool that TransLink is developing with Transport 2050. There's a new regional target of new and redeveloped housing in urban centers and frequent transit development areas, specifically affordable rental housing, as we have known discovered through our research that renters, particularly low-income renters, demand and depend on transit much more than others. And there are new policies that encourage, again, this theme of transit-oriented affordable housing and protecting the existing rental stock, which has been a challenge when redevelopment comes along for higher value housing stock and often pushes affordable rental units out of the way and forces the relocation of the tenants out to further periphery of the region, which makes it harder for them to travel around. There are stronger protections for the limited and scarce industrial lands in our region. But on the other side of the coin, there is introduced flexibility for residential uses near rapid transit stations in employment areas to provide more opportunities for mixing of uses in those areas to support better employment and housing options in those key pieces of the region. There's stronger climate action, including collective actions to reach very aggressive greenhouse gas emission targets. But something that hasn't had a lot of attention over the last 10 years is around the adaptation pieces of climate change. Mitigation of climate impacts is still critically important, but the impacts of climate are coming, and we're already seeing impacts this year with our extreme heat events. And we know sea level rise is coming, and now we need to really plan for those anticipated impacts so that we can all be ready for them collectively. There's a new regional target that's being introduced to the plan to protect half the land base for nature and habitat, and also achieve a new tree canopy cover target within the urban areas of the region. Both of those targets hadn't existed before. And so we need to start working to these objectives to help us deal with things like extreme heat events and all the benefits that come from the natural areas of the region. We have done extensive work on social equity and the impacts of the regional policies on those areas, and the contribution that regional policy has towards building better social equity outcomes. There's much more work to do, but we've moved the dial in terms of how we are considering access to job and transportation opportunities and affordable housing in a much more profound way than we have previous. There's also a much more of an emphasis on building solid relationships and ongoing relationships with First Nations, and how growth planning needs of those communities impact surrounding communities and infrastructure demands going forward. And just a note at the bottom that our regional targets are that they are regional. They're not meant to be achieved at every local municipality, as every jurisdiction brings different attributes to the collective benefit of us all. So it's about achieving these targets collectively and moving towards them as best as jurisdictions can. So as I noted, we are in a comment period now that ends at the end of November 26th, in advance of the formal bylaw process. We are accepting written comments by council resolution up until that time. There's also an opportunity for public feedback through an online feedback form where residents, businesses, others can contribute their own comments to be considered. We have completed a public webinar. We actually have another one tomorrow that we are partnering with TransLink on to present to UDI members. And there's been a number of promotions and ongoing meetings with the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. So in terms of next steps, we're in our comment period. The process will be reevaluated in December when we go through the comments that have been received. Assuming that the alignment with local plans continues to be as anticipated, we will be presenting a bylaw for first and second reading to the Metro Vancouver board early in the new year. We have to hold a formal regional public hearing, which will be anticipated to be held in March, and then it will be out for formal signatory acceptance, where all local governments, TransLink, the adjacent regional districts, have to accept by resolution. And then if that period goes forward without exception, then we will have final bylaw reading in July before the Metro Vancouver board. So I'll leave it there, and Heather and I are happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you very much, James. And I'm just going to change my view here so I can see the hands. Okay. Do we have any questions out there? There's one from David Hawking.
I saw Allison's hand go up before mine.
Okay, sorry. That's all right. Go ahead, David, and we'll get Allison.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you, James and Heather, for coming and talking to us. I mean, it's a really important document, but from our perspective, of course, we don't have to submit a regional context statement. So I really appreciate you coming out and giving an overview. I went through the document again this afternoon, and I just think it's so welcome that there is such a comprehensive and thoughtful plan and strategy for the future. I find it, I mean, my awareness, it was interesting you presented the history. Mine just goes back to the LRSP, and it's interesting how this has developed over time. But I think we really have an excellent document here. And some of it, of course, wouldn't really apply. The urban area stuff and the large industry, but goals 3, 4, and 5 are really important for Bowen. I guess part of the frustration that I have is that this really excellent planning document is not something we have to follow. I'd love us to follow it more, and that's a conversation I'll have more with our own council. We had a conversation earlier about leaving Bowen off the land use map, and I understand the reasons for that, but I sure don't like it being white. You know, when you look at that first map, the other thing that's white is First Nation lands, and there's really nothing on Bowen to say it's any different from, or that it isn't that. Maybe we need something on there that says something about the Islands Trust responsibility, or something that just indicates why this is left off the map. But it is strange that it's, you know, it's off the, even though Crippen Park is a conservation and recreation area, it's not in the conservation and recreation map for Bowen. We do have the greenway going across, but we don't have anything else. So I'm just struggling with that. I don't know how to address it, but I just don't like how it's left out like that. And I know we've had a conversation about that already. I do have one recommendation to change, please. And this is on goal 5, support sustainable transportation choices. And it's subset, it's goal 5.2.4, and that's on page 82 of the document. And I'll just read it, and then I'll explain why I suggest a small change. So 5.2.4 under supporting sustainable transportation choices says, advocate to the province, TransLink, and neighboring regional districts to request that the following elements are considered when contemplating future expansion of private vehicle capacity on major roads, highways, and crossings. And then it goes from A to F, and it's things like demand management, greenhouse gases, the long-term effects of induced demand. And I think you need to include BC Ferries on that list. And BC, we have, our transportation committees have been long advocating to BC Ferries to look at the Horseshoe Bay, what they call a terminal. We want it to be a transportation hub, to look at some of the different forms of transportation we know we're going to be having to shift towards over time, particularly foot passenger service. And but what BC Ferries has got in their plan so far is just a nicer version of the 50-year-old strategy of putting cars first. So basically, in terms of, now, of course, this affects Bowen Island, but really it affects West Vancouver and everyone in the city, because it's making sure we continue to have a real emphasis on cars, even for commuting ferry runs, such as Bowen Island and Langdale. And that affects all of Metro Vancouver because of its traffic. So I think putting BC Ferries in there would add a little bit. So those are my initial comments. But once again, I just want to thank you for this, for coming here and really doing all the work that you have done on such a remarkable document. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, David. Allison?
Okay, so thanks, John and Heather. Slide 8, it was a compilation of data from all the regions. I'm assuming we're in there. So can we get the data that you used for Bowen? Or have our planners already got that?
You would have that. So that would have been worked through with planners and so on, but we can provide it at any time. Absolutely. Most of this,
I didn't know whether they gave you numbers and then you massaged them, or so the final number is the same as what they gave you then.
No, we have a really interesting process, which is both top down and bottom up. And so we start with our model. And so it has both trend forward information, and then, as James said, a set of assumptions about what will happen in the future. And then we did a roadshow and went out to every member jurisdiction and talked about how does that align with your projections and aspirations for growth. And we kind of end up with a set of projections that take those local considerations into play.
So when you did the roadshow, that was with our staff?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so
we'll happily provide that
from you if staff doesn't have them. Okay, yes. That was the first question. On slide 10, you've got urban centers. I've printed off so in looking at the hard copy map for urban centers, and now I don't know which one it is. There we go. It's map 4. It looks to me like is like the Ambleside, Brentwood, Edmonds, White Rock, they're all the same color. They're all urban centers, but they're not, they're municipal town centers rather than, because the legend sort of looks like it's pink, and then some of them look orange and some of them look pink.
Would you like me to share a screen so you can take a look at that?
Map 4.
Yep.
Sure, happy to do it. So here's map 4. And what I can tell you is
Oh,
that
it's much better on the screen than the printed version I've got.
there you go.
They're all clearly pink. Okay, great. So Metro Core is downtown Vancouver, and then Surrey, and then regional city centers. That's okay. So that all makes sense. So I guess my question is, why is Snug Cove, and this maybe gets back to David's question, not shown as a municipal town center?
Again, the main reason is that Bowen Island is not signatory to this plan. And so your regional planning is undertaken through Islands Trust and
Well,
not
our
through Metro
regional plan
Vancouver.
is undertaken by ourselves and approved by them through the local trust.
That's right. But
But-
we don't have policies that apply when it comes to centers for Bowen Island.
So if we were not under the Islands Trust, would Snug Cove be a municipal town center?
There's processes in the plan right now on how you could apply to be an urban center. It's a bit of a challenge. It has a whole set of criteria. There's a table in there that kind of lists that this is a location that's intended for growth and has transit and all of those kinds of things. But right now, these centers that you see here have been in the plan. They're carried directly forward from Metro 2040.
That's what
There's
I-
no new centers at this time.
Okay.
And there are processes in the plan on how you can either move between different types of centers or have one added.
Okay, so while we're sort of just talking about the map, I quite concur with David's comments that things like Crippen Park and the other areas that might fit, that they're nothing to do with Islands Trust approving our growth strategies or anything. They're just sort of fact things. It's because it's very confusing to our public, I think, that none of our stuff, and especially Crippen Park, is on there. And the other thing is, I would appreciate it, I think, if the Bowen lands could be given a different color from First Nations lands. So that they're, and the note, at least the note David referenced, so that it explains why Bowen Island isn't really covered in there. And then part of my reason about asking about the town centers is, and I've got to go back to Transport 2050. I think in the last version that's out for consultation, there was reference to marine transportation between town centers. And we dearly would love to have marine transportation from Snug Cove to the Seabus terminal. So some sort of passenger ferry, and Lions Bay might as well. So that sort of, so I'll follow up on that one separately. And then I guess on slide 11, I mean, if you showed our Crown land in Crippen Park, we probably already contributing 50% of our land for nature. But my question on that one is what's the metric going to be for measuring it? Is it going to be the quote protected, like it's a park or a covenant, or is it just going to be, Crown land, vacant Crown land, will it count?
Well, I'll start, and then maybe James can jump in there as well. The metric really is around what areas are protected for nature. And so we have worked hard to develop a protected areas layer that encompasses ecologically sensitive areas that are protected to conservation areas, as well as parks, etc.
So vacant Crown land, like the upper lands above West Van, aren't counted as natural green space.
I don't know the answer to that. James, do you?
Well, it is a land use based plan. So as Heather's saying, that we kind of measure it by land that's designated as conservation and recreation. So those lands up in West Vancouver, some of them are urban and some of them are, even though they're not developed, so they would not be included just for the sake of measuring.
But the Capilano watershed and the ones that are designated recreation would be included?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's the intent, yeah.
So to the extent that recreation sites and trails BC has some of our Crown land as because of the trails and the mapping, designated recreation, then that might fit. Okay. And then, okay, I think that was my questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Allison. Maureen.
Thank you, Miranda, and welcome Heather and James to Bowen again. I just have a couple of comments. The first is to say how much I appreciate the reframing of Goal 4 as diverse and affordable housing choices. I think that the complete communities descriptor sometimes presented a little bit of a challenge for people's understanding, especially in a Bowen context. I think that we definitely can support and welcome the goal of diverse and affordable housing choices. The second is just to say, as a member of the Metro Parks Committee, that the goal of nature needs half is something that I hold very dearly. And I think it's also a great way of conceptualizing the direction that Metro wants to go in. I agree with David's concerns regarding sort of the lack of presence in some way of Bowen in the, or a mysterious presence, let's put it that way, in the land use designation maps. And I do understand why, but in the past, there have been explanatory footnotes, for example, and if we can't resolve the color issue, if we can't resolve the shading issue, then at least we need to have some sort of explanatory footnote there. I think it would be quite confusing for Bowen and First Nation lands to be presented in exactly the same way as both Allison and David had mentioned. And then just my final point, which actually is a question, is has there been any engagement with the Islands Trust regarding Metro 2050?
Thank you so much for the question, and through you, Mayor Ander. We haven't reached out, I don't believe, to Islands Trust at this point. Most of our engagement has been with adjacent regional districts because they are signatory to the plans. We work closely with FERD and the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. We've worked closely with the province in terms of a number of different ministries and so on, but we haven't worked with Islands Trust, to my knowledge.
Maybe I could jump in, not formally, Heather, we have had conversations staff to staff. And interestingly, Islands Trust is also updating their plan. So they reached out to us and we had a great conversation about what their objectives are. And they wanted to know more about what we were doing and how we were engaging, particularly First Nations. So we did have a staff to staff conversation, actually several, and we shared some resources and ideas. So that connection has been made, just not formally.
Yeah, can you say, if possible, can you say how those conversations affected Metro 2050? Did they?
No, not fundamentally. It was more of a reassurance that we weren't conflicting with what they were doing. I think that was a positive outcome, but I can't say that they influenced the direction of the plan.
Okay, thank you, James.
All right, thanks, Maureen. And over to Sue Ellen.
Thank you very much, and hello, Metro Vancouver folks. My name is Sue Ellen Fast. I'm also, besides being a Bowen councillor, I'm a Bowen Islands Trust trustee, and having been elected to the executive committee, so I'm a vice chair. So this is great. I was going to ask some of the questions, obviously, that have been mentioned already. And I think that there's a lot of correspondence or overlap. And I was going to suggest a sort of grid pattern or some kind of way of graphically identifying that a bunch of shared goals or the similar 2050 livability and conservation and goals. Anyway, in the chat, I've put in the Bowen profile of the Islands Trust. There, it's just a 2-pager, but you can see it's got some graphics and it does answer some of the questions that the other councillors have been raising, like 20%, 21% is protected, and that kind of thing. So it shows the way the Islands Trust is measuring it, and perhaps some link to some kind of document like this. Doesn't have to be this one. I believe they're in the process of beginning to update these, partly because things keep changing. We've at the Islands Trust side have more species at risk funding and projects now. And of course, the new biosphere reserve in Howe Sound, there's more opportunities for conservation and lands for nature. And I think I'm hoping that you can find a way to identify that. Otherwise, by leaving it white or blank, it seems to illustrate non-participation and not being part of the Metro Vancouver, which puts people into question when they're paying taxes, both to Metro Vancouver and to Islands Trust. Why is this blank? And so I'm hoping you can find some kind of solution there with some kind of graphic magic. I think all it needs is an indication that Bowen Island is unique, and something in that regard. Anyway, I wanted to say I heard on the CBC radio today that the province has set new goals for climate action in terms of electrifying ferries. So I wanted to reinforce what Councillor Hawking said about turning the Horseshoe Bay so-called ferry terminal, but I think of it already as a transportation hub, into being more of a way to move people through interregionally, because then that takes vehicles off the highway and out of West Vancouver and off the bridges, potentially. And all things I think I saw in the Transport 2050 plan. And I want to, I didn't look through here very carefully, but I did participate in Transport 2050's session on Saturday, and I was really glad to see the cycling network and the Metro Parks Greenway similar network extending across Bowen, because I think that'll be a real backbone for people to access all of the protected and crown lands on Bowen for recreation. And without the climate and other impacts of driving everywhere and trying to find parking on a small island in our human scale. So I think there is more overlaps in that department in terms of access to nature. I was happy to see that in the Transport 2050 plan, and the COVID times are really showing that, and the visitation numbers at regional parks and all those things are up. So if our connection to Metro Vancouver and our contributions could be reflected in some way, that would be terrific. Even if you just write on it, not part of the target or something, that would be okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sue Ellen. Any comments on that, James or Heather?
I'd love to. Thank you for the opportunity. I think that our challenge right now is we've got many maps where Bowen is clearly a part of it. And so there's our sub-regional targets, our projections map that it shows that they're part of the North Shore for that. Definitely part of any of the inventory work that we've done. So the sensitive ecosystem inventory, part of that, the greenways and so on. Our challenge is that the regional land use designations are an implementation tool. And I know we've talked about that before, but they don't reflect every park. And so if you look at a place like Vancouver, only the parks that Vancouver submitted into the conservation and recreation designation are part of that. So they don't reflect a parks layer. They don't reflect, those kinds of things. They are regional land use designations as a tool, so that if a member wants to change land use designations, there's a mechanism for them to do that. And so I've really appreciated some of the ideas this evening around how to reflect Bowen Island's unique circumstances there, and certainly appreciate not having it as the same color as the First Nations land. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. I think the intent right now is that all of those lands are shown as white where the regional growth strategy doesn't apply. And we need to do a better job of reflecting the difference and uniqueness of Bowen. So thank you for those comments.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Michael Kale. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. And Heather and James, welcome to Bowen, albeit over Zoom. It was actually nice to hear someone talking very briefly, and it usually gets only a brief mention, and that is water transport. Although we are separate from you, we do in fact have an impact upon you from a transportation point of view, just as do other communities, maybe just outside your map, but also connected by water. And I guess I'm just asking the question, does it ever get any attention at all, passenger access to Metro via water transportation right into the heart? So alleviating some of the obvious issues we see, all of us see, of acute bottlenecks in key areas. And I'm just wondering, because it's a difficult subject to raise, small communities, seaborne transportations just have to be a financial anathema. I can't think of two items to put together and lose more money on. But however, realistically, in times to come, as we grow and we become more contiguous with yourselves, I suppose it's a little bit of a cry out that I hope the conversations surrounding passenger water-based transportation will one day find its real place, because it hasn't to date, and no criticism there. But I hope in future planning, since you're looking so far ahead, it may well.
All right. That it, Michael? Thank you. Okay. Any retort to that, Heather?
Thanks. I can start, and maybe James can jump in. I think this is where it's so critical that Metro 2050 and Transport 2050 are aligned, because this is a land use plan, but land use influences transportation and vice versa. And we always joke that the best transportation plan is a good land use plan. And I think TransLink says the opposite.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is that, yes, of course, we are talking about commuter sheds, and we're talking about folks who are commuting over water. We talk about the impact of the ferries down in outside of Delta. We talk about Barnston Island and access there and what that looks like. And so that's all part of this, but we're looking at it, our lens is primarily from a where are jobs and people living, et cetera, perspective. And TransLink is much more about the transportation side of it.
And maybe I can add, absolutely, the question and comments about water-based transportation for people and goods came up during our process. And that was the subject of several conversations with TransLink. So there's certainly nothing in our plan that would stand in the way of that. But to Heather's point, it's really about kind of connecting the greatest number of people or the greatest demand for goods with the greatest destination. And I'm sure those will evolve over time. And I know TransLink is looking at options, and there was lots of conversation about electric water taxis and the use of the Fraser River as a goods movement and people movement corridor. Infrastructure is a challenge right now to support that, but this is a long range plan, and things will evolve over time, and maybe that will become a viable thing that we'll certainly explore further down the road, or down the river, I guess, as it were.
All right, thank you, James and Heather. Allison, back to you, and then Sue Ellen.
Well, James, we need to add and down the sound.
Down the sound.
Down the river. Michael, the water transportation is addressed somewhat in the Transport 2050 plan, but the reason I raised it was because it says between town centers. So we're going to have to get town centers defined slightly differently for TransLink versus Metro Vancouver, I guess. Heather, you mentioned something about sub-regional plans. They're not in this plan, right?
Thanks for the question. Yes, what we've done is we've opted to roll our projections up to a sub-regional level. And part of that is they often get mistaken for targets, our projections for population growth. And this allows us to align better with infrastructure provision, which is normally done at a sub-regional level. And so the map that shows what sub-regions are, what's included in each sub-region for projections, shows Bowen Island as part of the North Shore sub-region.
Okay, so where do I find that map?
I can show you.
Is that the special study areas?
It's on page 19 of the strategy if you're following along at home.
Oh, I was busy looking at the maps in the appendix. Okay.
It's in the projections section of the plan. I think, yeah, Heather's
Okay.
pulling it up now.
So here you can
Oh,
see.
that one's in gray and white and I can't read it. Yes, okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Sue Ellen.
Thank you. I was struck when you said that the city of Vancouver submitted some parks, but not others. And I wondered if, perhaps not in the short term, but if the Islands Trust should submit the lands that it does protect for nature and that are identified in the profile that I sent there. I don't see, I'm sure that there's a reason that it can't be done, but that's what its purpose is. It just seems so funny. So I guess this is a question for James. James, when you talked about sharing information, did you ask them to, or is it worth them sending you a submission of what areas are protected, for example?
Well, yeah, through you, Mayor Ender. That a great question. No, we didn't talk about that. And this goes back to Heather's earlier comment about kind of the extent of our plan and kind of the purpose of what we're trying to do with land use designations. And we completely recognize that their land use plan is their own plan. And we certainly share information, but again, you know, we hadn't taken the same approach with this plan that we did with Metro 2040, and that is to show the land use designations on the island. If we are going to go that route, and it is still in draft, and we can go back and take a look at it and have some conversations about it, but you know, we will certainly make sure that we get the information we need from Islands Trust, but we haven't to date.
Sure. As in, maybe it could be a different shade of gray, but just to show the 20% is already protected, that, you know, there might be a way that you could add clarity and set the stage for collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sue Ellen. And back to Maureen.
Thank you, Mayor Ander. My questions have to do with the housing section. I'm a great fan of the housing data book, and I'm hoping it'll be coming out soon. I noticed that the way that data is being aggregated in a number of the strategies has to do with a compilation of information from the regional context statements that are being submitted to Metro. We don't prepare a regional context statement for Metro Vancouver. So how will that work in terms of, for example, our contribution to rental housing in the in Metro? We've just got a rental housing building that's going to be opening up, I believe, in November, and there'll be 20 plus units there. How would that work if we're not submitting data through the regional context statements?
It's a great question. I'll start. And through you, Mary Ander. So the regional planning is going to be collecting data at a municipal level and as a service, including Bowen Island outside of the regional growth strategy. That's just something that we do. So our projections, our housing data book, all of our work around those pieces is a service that sits above and outside Metro 2050. And we would be working with you to submit that data through that service anytime. I think our challenge is that Metro 2050, if Bowen isn't a signatory to it, you wouldn't use that as the tool to do it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so when you were presenting, I understand, when you were presenting, for instance, the statistics on progress towards the goal of having X number of rental homes, would you factor in the Bowen homes?
Probably not for Metro 2050, but we would as a regional reporting outside of that service.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That helps.
Thanks, Maureen. Back to David.
Thank you, Gary. And I'm back to the colors, the white on the map. My preferred solution, having sort of listened to how we're going back and forth, if we could have Bowen represented the way the land actually is, as you did on Metro 2040, but then you had some sort of a note beside that that said it is not a signatory. It's not a signatory to this regional growth strategy, and explain perhaps what that might mean. But this is an accurate representation of land use pattern on Bowen, because that's useful information for everybody. It's useful information for Bowen Islanders to see. It's useful for others to see. From a regional perspective, there's no question that we're part of the green zone. We always have been an important part of the green zone. It's where folks like to go. So I don't know if there's some way of having an accurate representation of like you had in 2040, but with some sort of a qualifying statement that explains that it's not a signatory and so on. I don't know. We're not going to decide tonight, but that's just that's what I like the best. So thanks for listening to me one more time about the colors on the map.
Well, thank you, David. And I'm sure they're going to take that home with them, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, Sue Ellen, I see your hand there, but I think it was just leftover. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's sort of bringing our time to a close, unfortunately, because it's a very interesting conversation. I love the plan.
Can I ask one more quick question? I put my
Okay.
hand back up.
All right, go ahead.
Heather, on page 19 or 18, you referred me to the different population buildup. And on page 18, the North Shore subregion does not include Bowen Island in the narrative. So.
That's right. I saw that too, Allison.
Yeah. So somehow, again, we're not signatories, but so is our population. I mean, it's peanuts compared to 3.8 million, but is it even counted in that 3.8 million? I would say no when you see that.
Heather, do you want to respond, or James?
So I'm throwing that out for something to check into and look up.
Okay.
And then the other thing I was going to say was, because we're not part of the regional growth strategy, but Bowen Island has an OCP, which has land use designations, and the actual designations in our, land use bylaw and parks, protected areas and so forth. And we can easily provide you with that information. It's our plan and our information. And the other would be maybe a page that's separate, that's a map of Bowen Island, showing the ALR and the protected areas and the land use crown lands designations, and just say information provided by Bowen Island municipality, and just a little bit about the fact that we're not signatories to the RGS. Maybe that would solve the problem. Similar to what David was suggesting, but not on the same map. You could say see attached map X or something.
A dotted line. No, I'm sure you'll come up with something.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea. I think we always have this thing where, between the four, the small and Lions Bay ourselves, I guess Belcarra and more. We've always had this little thing that we're the little guys, and we sort of get overlooked all the time. So I guess putting us all in white in there wasn't a big help on that part of the subconscious there. Anyway, we're going to let you go, and we really appreciate this. I love the overview. It's very people-centric, which is amazing. And I think it really takes into consideration all levels of society, because we are going through certainly a different phase in our in the future, and who we have to take care of on this planet. And I think it goes a long way in that direction. So I'd like to thank you both, Heather, James, thank you very much, and all the best in the future. And we'll sign off.